Imagine walking barefoot through a dense Jurassic jungle. The air is thick with moisture. Every step squishes in ancient mud, and then you feel it, a vibration, not from a dinosaur, from the ground, all around you. You look down, and they're here. Not one, not 10, but thousands. Ants, the size of your hand. Their jaws clicking, their antennae scanning, their eyes locked on you. You start to run, but by then it's already too late. Welcome to Earth 180 million years ago. This is the world of giant ants. And today we're going to explore exactly what they were, how they evolved, what they looked like, and why it's terrifying they ever existed at all. Let's start at the beginning. It's the middle of the Jurassic period, around 180 million years ago. Dinosaurs dominate the land, sure, but that's only part of the story. The Earth looks very different. The continents are still smashed together in a supercontinent called Pangaea, though it's starting to break apart. Volcanic activity is reshaping coastlines. Inland seas are rising. Rainforests stretch across much of what is now North America, Africa, and Europe. There are no grasslands yet, just towering conifers, ferns, ginkgos, and cycads. Picture something between a pine forest, a jungle, and a greenhouse. And the air? It's richer in oxygen than today, maybe up to 30% compared to our modern 21%. That's incredibly important. Why? Because insects breathe passively, through openings called spiracles. More oxygen in the air means larger insects can survive and function. That's why this period, the Mesozoic, is home to gigantic bugs of all kinds. Huge dragonflies, enormous millipedes, wasps the size of sparrows, and among them the ancestors of ants. But here's the twist. True ants didn't fully exist yet. Instead, what we see in the fossil record are early ant-like wasps, primitive hymenopterans, insect groups that would eventually give rise to modern ants, bees, and wasps. These creatures weren't swarm-minded superorganisms yet. They were solitary hunters like modern wasps, fast, agile, specialized, equipped with jaws, stingers, and venom. Many lived in hollow logs or underground burrows. They weren't ants as we know them, not yet, but they were prototypes. And what made them truly terrifying wasn't just size, it was how quickly evolution was preparing them for domination. To understand how ants got here, we have to go back even further, to the Triassic period, 50 million years before this point. Most entomologists agree, ants evolved from a group of wasp-like ancestors, possibly from the Spicamurma lineage, an extinct group that bridges the gap between wasps and ants. These early hymenopterans were likely solitary predators or scavengers, equipped with strong mandibles for gripping prey, capable of paralyzing or killing other insects with venom, highly adapted for navigating dense vegetation and complex terrain. They didn't have the hierarchical social systems that modern ants use. No queens, no workers, no sprawling underground empires, not yet. But their body plan, that was already ant-like. They had narrow waists known as petioles, segmented antennae used for touch, smell, and communication, strong mandibles for cutting, lifting, or killing, compound eyes for spotting prey and navigating terrain. Some may have had primitive stingers or acidic sprays. And in a hot, wet, oxygen-rich world, they were thriving. Let's visualize one of these early proto-ants, perhaps a creature like Gerontoformica or Myanmurma, though those are slightly later fossils. Think of it as a hybrid between a modern trap-jaw ant and a hunting wasp. Size-wise, these early ants or near ants could range from 2 to 5 centimeters long, the length of a human thumb, with jaws that span half their face, and a bite force strong enough to cut through an exoskeleton. Their coloration, likely dark, maybe deep reds or browns. Some could have had glossy carapaces, others matte and camouflaged. Many might have blended perfectly into tree bark or forest floors. They weren't soft-bodied. These were armored insects, thick exoskeletons, reinforced joints, sharp sensory hairs. Their legs were long and thin, with claws for gripping moss, bark, or prey. Their movement would have been sudden, insect-fast, a jerky blur when they locked onto something. And their eyes, massive, multifaceted domes, They saw the world in fractured light, picking up the shimmer of wings, the flutter of leaves, the twitch of their next meal. These were predators. Every part of their design was built for efficiency, endurance, and aggression. And the scariest part, they worked alone. You weren't dealing with a nest, you were dealing with a hunter. Let's drop you into their world for a moment. You're walking through a damp prehistoric forest, brushing aside giant ferns. Something clicks on a branch beside you. You freeze. A long-bodied insect darts out, jaws snapping shut with a sharp clack. It circles a beetle the size of a mouse. In one fluid move, it lunges, bites through the thorax, and begins dragging the twitching body back toward a crevice in a fallen log. That beetle never had a chance. These proto-ants probably hunted small insects, larvae, or soft-bodied creatures, used chemical signals, primitive pheromones to mark paths or attract mates, nestled in dead wood, under rocks, or even burrowed shallowly, could climb trees, stalk vertically, or leap short distances, may have been territorial, fighting over hunting grounds or mates. There's even evidence in later fossils that suggests some already had the earliest forms of social behavior, like shared nests or brood care. Not colonies yet, but the spark of it was there. This is the exact moment in history when evolution begins to tilt the scale. These insects are no longer just surviving, they're specializing. And that means the era of the ant, the true superorganism, is on the horizon. So why is 180 million years ago such a key moment? Because in evolutionary terms, it's the moment right before the explosion. This was the stage where the blueprint for the most successful insect group on Earth was almost complete. The pieces were falling into place. Strong jaws, efficient locomotion, complex sensory system, venom delivery, burrowing and hiding behavior, environmental resilience, the groundwork for colony living. The behaviors, communication, and coordination starts in this very era. And as the Jurassic transitions into the Cretaceous, these hunters start organizing. And when they do, the game changes completely. You might think the danger passed with the Jurassic, that the world moved on. But the truth is, ants were just getting started. By the time the early Cretaceous period rolled in, somewhere around 130 million years ago, the hunters that once stalked alone were beginning to do something radically new. They began to cooperate. We find evidence in the fossil record, amber preserved in ancient trees, capturing snapshots of life in crystal. And what we find in that amber isn't just one ant, it's multiple, sometimes dozens, trapped together. And what that tells us is simple but profound. They weren't just individuals anymore, they were colonies. The first true ants, like the genus Sphinxomyrma, bridged the gap between wasp and modern ant. They still had some wasp-like traits, longer bodies, less specialization between castes, but you can see the changes. Their antennae are more elbowed, their mandibles more refined. Some had already started showing the first signs of caste differentiation, a division of labor between queens, males, and workers. This is when ants began behaving more like cells in a body than like individuals. And that changed everything. You see, one ant is just an insect, but a colony, that's an empire, with structure, communication, purpose. And when ants began to swarm, really swarm, nothing in the insect world stood a chance. They didn't just kill, they dismantled. They reorganized the very forest floor they lived on. They took over ecological roles, outcompeted solitary predators, and claimed territory with chemical warfare. They marked paths with pheromones. They recognized each other by smell. They coordinated complex attacks without ever speaking or seeing the whole battlefield. That level of coordination was unheard of in the insect world. Until now. Picture this. A log rots in the heart of a Cretaceous forest. A beetle the size of a thumb scuttles across it, looking for food. It finds something, a larva maybe. But before it can feed, the ground beneath it twitches. From inside the log, dozens of ants pour out. They're not large, maybe 2 or 3 centimeters, but they move as one. In less than a second, the beetle is overwhelmed, bitten, stung, torn apart, then carried away in pieces, back into the log. No alarm, no celebration, just the machine at work. That's what a colony is. a machine built out of bodies. And this was just the beginning. During this time, plants were also changing. Flowering plants, angiosperms, were spreading. They created new ecological niches, new foods, new strategies, and ants adapted fast. Some evolved to farm aphids for sugary secretions. Some began foraging further and coordinating supply chains. Some became underground excavators, able to create massive tunnel systems. But not all ants were underground dwellers. Some lived in trees, crawling through bark and vines like predatory squirrels. Some hunted at night, using scent and vibration instead of sight. And a few specialized in raiding other colonies, enslaving their rivals, stealing their larvae, and forcing them into servitude. This wasn't just survival. This was domination. And if you think this sounds modern, it is. Because many of the behaviors we see in today's ants were already taking shape back then. Division of labor, warfare, farming, long-term planning, insect societies behaving like superorganisms, all of that started here. By now, their physical design had evolved too. Their bodies were compact, hardened. Their mandibles weren't just tools, they were weapons. Some species had curved trap jaws that could snap shut at lightning speed. Others had hooks, barbs, or even spikes built into their exoskeletons for defense or intimidation. Their antennae became more sensitive, capable of detecting pheromone trails so faint a human would never notice them. And inside their colonies, queens could live for years, decades even, each one laying thousands of eggs, birthing workers who would live and die without ever seeing sunlight. One queen, one purpose, millions of loyal subjects. But the scariest thing isn't the anatomy, it's how ants turned the world into a resource map. Everything was usable, everything was claimable. Forests weren't just homes, they were networks of supply, routes to be optimized. Other insects weren't just competition, they were food or slaves. And they did all of this without consciousness, without strategy as we know it. It was instinct, chemistry, biology, the perfect program. And the thing about perfect programs, they scale fast. As ant colonies grew, their influence expanded across prehistoric landscapes. And though they weren't the size of your arm, their numbers and coordination made them an unstoppable force. If you were a small vertebrate, a hatchling lizard, a primitive bird chick, or even a sickly mammal, you stayed away from where the ants moved. If you couldn't move, they'd find you. Because when ants evolved en masse, they didn't just inherit the forest floor, they rewrote it. They restructured food chains, they influenced where fungi grew, where seeds spread, and which insects could survive in a given area. They pushed other creatures into new ecological roles, forced predators to change hunting patterns, made herbivores shift migration paths. One colony could impact an entire forest. Now imagine hundreds. That's where we're headed. This wasn't a Jurassic curiosity anymore. This was the beginning of something massive, something ancient, something still crawling beneath your feet today. But we're not there yet. Not quite. Because the next step, the truly terrifying step, came when ants developed specialized castes. Not just queens and workers, but warriors, scouts, builders, tunnelers, caretakers. A single organism made up of thousands of perfectly adapted bodies, each one born to do only its one task, over and over, with absolute efficiency. That's what we're going to explore next. In the next part, we'll dive deep into the anatomy of these colony machines. We'll explore the soldiers, the queens, the assassins. We'll look at their weapons, their strategies, and what they'd do if you wandered too close. Spoiler, it doesn't end well. Because the ants, they were evolving faster than the rest of the world could keep up. And by the time nature noticed, it was already over. By the time ant colonies reached a level of social sophistication, nature had effectively created something new. Not just a population of insects, but a biological machine. A single colony wasn't a loose collection of bugs, it was a system of perfectly aligned parts. Each ant was a cog in a living superorganism, and each caste had a purpose written into its very anatomy. At the center of it all was the queen, often the largest individual in the entire colony. She didn't just lay eggs, she laid the future. In some species, queens could live 10, 20, even 30 years. They were built for endurance, their massive abdomens swollen with eggs, fed and protected by thousands of loyal workers. Without her, the colony had no legacy. With her, it had endless potential. Surrounding her were workers, smaller, versatile, and built for utility. They did everything: foraged, cleaned, fed larvae, built tunnels, maintained nest temperature, and defended the queen with their lives. They had no reproductive ability, no ambition, and no free will, just relentless drive, powered by chemicals and instinct. They didn't need to think, the colony thought for them. But in larger, more evolved colonies, ants took specialization even further. Some species developed dedicated soldier castes, larger-bodied ants with reinforced heads and oversized mandibles, capable of crushing invaders and blocking tunnels with their bodies. Their heads could be so big they couldn't even feed themselves. Workers had to bring them food. They weren't tools, they were weapons. And then there were the scouts. Small, fast, equipped with hypersensitive antennae, these ants roamed far from the nest, following scent trails, mapping terrain, and locating food or enemies. Their brains were slightly more developed than the average workers. They had to make decisions, adapt, report. Think of them as the eyes and ears of the colony, and once they found something useful or dangerous, they relayed it with precision. With this internal organization came something far more threatening: coordination. Colonies could now operate like real-time information networks. When a scout discovered a dead insect or a competitor's nest, a chemical message was sent instantly through pheromone trails. Within minutes, a full-scale operation could be mobilized. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of ants marching in unison toward a target, each one knowing exactly what to do. This wasn't reaction, it was strategy, and as ant species diversified during the Cretaceous period, their tactics evolved into something disturbingly close to organized warfare. They didn't just defend territory, they took it. Entire colonies began launching raids on other nests, stealing food, larvae, or even other ants to enslave. Yes, enslavement. Some ant species developed the ability to raid other colonies, kidnap their young, and raise them as workers. These enslaved ants would then perform tasks for the colony that captured them, often unaware that they were helping the enemy. It's one of nature's most twisted systems, and it still exists today. Meanwhile, the architecture of ant nests became more advanced. Underground tunnel systems with ventilation shafts, waste chambers, nurseries, and food storage. Surface mounds that channeled sunlight and regulated heat. Entire tree hollows repurposed into vertical ant cities. And the bigger the colony, the more ambitious the infrastructure. At this point in the Cretaceous, ants weren't just surviving in forests. They were shaping them by turning over soil, moving seeds, pruning competing species, and hunting pests. They influenced which plants flourished, which insects spread, and which animals dared to nest nearby. The forest floor was no longer a random ecosystem. It was territory organized, patrolled, and claimed. And if you had the misfortune of stepping into one of these territories, even as a dinosaur hatchling, a small mammal, or something as insignificant as a lizard, you could be overwhelmed. Not by a single bite, but by 1,000 bites. Not by one chase, but by an onslaught of coordination. This is what makes ants unlike almost anything else in natural history. They don't need to be big, they don't need to be fast, because they win with numbers, with timing, with relentless, merciless unity. And this was only the beginning of their empire. By the end of the Cretaceous period, ants were no longer just successful, they were global. Fossils from this time appear on every continent except Antarctica. As flowering plants spread and climates diversified, ants followed. They adapted quickly to new environments, deserts, mountains, dense rainforests. Where other creatures specialized and narrowed, ants expanded. Their ability to shape their surroundings gave them an advantage few others possessed. They didn't just live in an environment, they altered it. When ants cleared vegetation to build nests or tunneled deep into soil, they changed how water flowed, how nutrients cycled, even how seeds germinated. Some ants evolved mutualistic relationships with plants, defending them from herbivores in exchange for shelter or nectar. Others began farming fungi or herding aphids, tiny livestock tended like cattle. With each adaptation, they tightened their grip on the ecosystem. Birds, reptiles, even mammals learned to avoid ant-infested regions. They weren't just annoying, they were dangerous. Even a small group of ants could blind, disfigure, or kill a young or weakened animal. Their presence alone was enough to shift migration patterns and alter behavior. As colonies grew larger, so did their complexity. Nest architecture became more elaborate. Some colonies spanned dozens of connected chambers underground, with each chamber dedicated to a specific function: egg care, larval feeding, food storage, dead body disposal. Others built arboreal networks, stringing their homes between branches with silk produced by their larvae. These nests could stretch across entire tree systems, functioning like a living nervous system, alert, reactive, and constantly communicating. But nothing demonstrates ant dominance better than the emergence of supercolonies, vast, interlinked networks of nests that function as a single cooperative entity. In modern times, we've documented supercolonies of Argentine ants stretching thousands of kilometers, with billions of individuals across multiple continents. And while we don't have direct fossil evidence of prehistoric supercolonies on that scale, all the behaviors were already there. The groundwork was laid. Imagine, 100 million years ago, a colony spanning an entire river valley, dozens of queens, thousands of nests, foraging parties that never ended, wave after wave of soldiers and workers cycling through like a conveyor belt of purpose. Any creature entering that zone, whether to drink, nest, or simply pass through, would face relentless attack. No strategy, no emotion, just the raw mechanical violence of a superorganism defending its perimeter. Ants weren't just surviving mass extinction events, they were evolving through them. When the asteroid struck 66 million years ago, wiping out the non-avian dinosaurs and reshaping the planet's biosphere, ants didn't just survive, they thrived. Their underground nests protected them from fire and fallout. Their flexible diets let them scavenge, adapt, endure. Their colonies persisted where larger animals died, and from that moment on, there was no stopping them. The mammals that would later dominate the Cenozoic era, the age of humans, grew up in a world already ruled by ants. They learned to avoid them, to work around them, to compete at the edges of their influence. Ants were no longer a threat, they were a limiting factor, one you had to live with or die by. It's important to remember that size isn't everything. A tiger is terrifying alone. A bear is powerful in a one-on-one fight. But ants? They don't operate on those terms. They don't care about your strength or intelligence. They care about access, numbers, speed. You can fight one, but you can't fight the colony. And when colonies work together, when they become networks, when they outgrow borders, when they erase distinctions between separate queens and nests, they form something humanity should fear deeply: collective will. Because collective will, when weaponized, is what rewrites ecosystems. And 100 million years ago, ants were already starting to write the rules. Let's imagine for a moment that they survived, that somewhere in a lost pocket of Earth, deep in a rainforest, sealed beneath the ice, hidden in the folds of time, Jurassic ants never died out, that a species of giant, aggressive, colony-building ants still thrives in secret. What would that world look like? First, understand the scale. A single ancient proto-ant from 180 million years ago could reach up to 5 centimeters in length, nearly double the size of most modern ants. Imagine them not as background bugs, but as visible, mobile hazards. You'd hear them before you saw them, a rustling swarm through dry leaves, jaws clacking, antennae twitching, armor glistening. Your picnic in the park? Over. A drop snack would attract a foraging party within minutes. A hole in your wall? Colonized overnight. These ants wouldn't nibble, they'd cut, drag, dismember. Their strength-to-size ratio would still let them carry objects several times their weight. But their speed, intelligence, and coordination, that's what would make them lethal. Now scale that up. Not one colony, but a network. Super colonies of hand-sized ants forming turf that stretches across entire ecosystems. You wouldn't be able to grow crops without protective barriers. Livestock, constantly at risk. Children wouldn't be allowed to play barefoot outdoors. Forests would become danger zones, national parks war zones of insect dominance. And it's not just about bites. These ants, if following evolutionary paths similar to modern trap jaw or bullet ants, would be venomous, painful, possibly deadly. One sting from a bullet ant today causes hours of excruciating electric pain. Now imagine a creature twice that size, optimized for injection. You wouldn't need to be allergic to die, you just need to be unlucky. Ecologically, everything shifts. Invasive ant species today are already capable of wiping out native insect life in regions they colonize. A Jurassic survivor strain would be an extinction-level threat to local biodiversity. Beetles, termites, caterpillars, gone. Bird populations would collapse without food. Soil dynamics would alter. Flowering plants would lose their pollinators. Entire forests would start to rot from below as decomposers vanished. Even apex predators might steer clear. Coyotes, birds of prey, small cats, they wouldn't risk a nest encounter. And scavengers would never beat the ants to a carcass. Whatever died in the jungle, the ants would find it first. Could humans fight back? Sure. We have chemicals, traps, fire. But even now, we struggle to contain ant infestations with technology on our side. Fighting prehistoric, ultra-aggressive ant species would mean full-scale pest warfare, not neighborhood infestations. Regional crises, biological control would fail. Pesticides would only delay them. They'd evolve, outmaneuver, reorganize. You'd need new defenses, ant-proof housing, motion sensors, chemical barriers, maybe even territorial ceasefires, areas left untouched to prevent retaliatory swarms. The ants wouldn't negotiate, but they'd adapt. They always do. And if you think this is just fantasy, remember, modern ants already rule the world in silence. They make up an estimated 20% of Earth's total animal biomass. For every human on Earth, there are roughly 2.5 million ants, and that's just the tiny ones. Imagine if they were just a little bit bigger. So the next time you see an ant crawling across your counter, think twice before squashing it. It may be small, but it's part of something ancient, organized, and unstoppable. And if its ancestors ever came back, we wouldn't stand a chance.